Harper Audio presents The Disappearance by Annabel Kantaria, read by Jessica Ann Ball. 18th of July, 2013, 10 p.m. Captain Steegman's gaze swept around the ship's library, shifting like a searchlight until it had touched everyone in the room. He took a deep breath, steadied his hands on the back of the chair, and spoke. The search has been called off. I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling sob. Even though I'd been primed to hear these words, the sound of them left me winded. Until now, I'd still held out hope. There had been a mistake. Mum had been picked up by another ship. She'd been brought aboard, cold, weak, wrapped in a silver blanket, but alive. She'd floated on her back. She'd clung onto some flotsam. She'd been rescued by a lifeboat. Failing any of those scenarios, her body had been recovered. Anything but this inconclusive conclusion. Captain Steegman stood motionless. He was waiting for a response. I looked at John. He didn't meet my gaze. He was looking at the floor, his thin lips pressed in a hard line, his expression inscrutable. The only part of my brother that moved was his hand, his fingertips tapping a rhythm on the arm of the stuffed leather armchair. I wanted to speak, but there were no words. Captain Steegman paced the library floor, his steps lithe in his rubber-soled shoes. Doris, the cruise director, stood awkwardly by the bookshelves, a walkie-talkie in her hand, her lipstick rudely red. Outside the picture window, small white caps topped the ocean like frosting. I imagined my mother's arms poking desperately up from the crests of each wave, her mouth forming an O as the lights of the ship faded into the distance. In the library, you couldn't feel the low rumble of the ship's engines that permeated the lower decks, but snatches of a Latin beat carried from the Vida Loca dance party taking place on the pool deck outside. Doris's walkie-talkie crackled to life, then fell silent. The decision has not been taken lightly, said the captain, his English curt with a German accent, his words staccato. We have to face the facts. Mrs. Templeton has been missing for over 40 hours. The ship was sailing at full speed on the night she was last seen. We have no idea when she went overboard, nor where. The search area covers thousands of square kilometers. He paused, looking at John and me, then, perhaps heartened by the absence of tears, continued, ticking off points with his fingers as he spoke. A band of dull platinum circled his wedding finger. As you are already aware, I did not turn the ship. This was because, with Mrs. Templeton missing for 39 hours before the search was initiated, I felt there was nothing to be gained by retracting our route. It is my belief that Mrs. Templeton did not fall overboard shortly before she was reported missing, but many hours prior to that, most likely in the early hours of the 16th of July. I opened my mouth to speak. This was pure supposition, but the captain raised his hand in a request for me to be patient. However, he said, tenders were dispatched from both Mykonos and Santorini, which is the area in which the ship was sailing when Mrs. Templeton was last seen. A fleet of tenders traced our route from either end. Now he paused and looked at each of us in turn once more. I gave a tiny shake of my head, eyes closed. There was nothing I could say to change what had happened. The Coast Guard was informed as soon as the ship's search yielded nothing, continued the captain. 2 helicopters were scrambled, and all ships within a 30-kilometer radius of the course we took that night were asked to join the search. He paused again, looked at his shoes, then up again. I believe there were 5 vessels involved. The search has been fruitless. Mrs. Templeton could now have been in the water without a flotation device for up to 48 hours. She was... He searched his memory. 70 years old? His voice trailed off, and he looked again at John, then at me, his eyebrows raised. The implication clear. She could not have survived. John closed his eyes and nodded almost imperceptibly. Captain Steegman echoed the nod.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?